The Yamim Ha'ara'im are filled with memories of our previous Yamim Ha'ara'im, and also memories of those who are no longer with us. It's impossible, actually, to reckon with who we are without reckoning with memory. And we're going to look at a couple of poems today. You should have a sheet. Do you have a sheet? From the rustle, it appears you have a sheet. These poems are by Yehuda Amichai, the famous Israeli poet who died in the 2000. He spoke at the SAJ just shortly before he died, and there's a book called Patuach Sagor Patuach, Open Closed Open, that was published posthumously with memory with these poems, these three that we're going to read. We'll probably only read two today. But he was an old man, and you can tell how occupied he was with the question of memory in his last years. I'm actually not going to read the first poem on the sheet, the Amen Stone, which in the English version of the book is the opening poem, and actually there's a companion to the Amen Stone as the last poem of the book. But we're going to look at two poems from a section called My Parents' Lodging Place. For those who understand the Hebrew, I would encourage you to read the Hebrew, because the Hebrew carries, of course, the language of the Torah embedded in it, and so it's more powerful in Hebrew because the poems are deeply powerful anyway. But if you know Hebrew, you should read the Hebrew because it carries extra resonance. My mother was a prophet and didn't know it. Not like Miriam the prophetess dancing with cymbals and tambourines. Not like Devorah who sat under the palm tree and judged the people. Not like Huldah who foretold the future, but my own private prophet. Silent and stubborn, I am obliged to fulfill everything she said, and I'm running out of lifetime. My mother was a prophet when she taught me the do's and don'ts of every day, paper verses for one-time use. You'll be sorry. You'll get exhausted. That will do you good. You'll feel like a new person. You'll really love it. You won't be able. You won't like that. You'll never manage to close it. I knew you wouldn't remember, wouldn't forget. Give, take, rest. Yes, you can. You can. And when my mother died, all her little predictions came together in one big prophecy that will last until the vision of the end of days. So this poem, I think, speaks to the notion of memory as prophecy in many ways, and also that life and people that raise us or we loved. I don't think this is, by the way, he has a lot of, anyone who knows his poetry knows that he has a deep amount of affection for his parents and love. Not everyone has parents like that, just to say. And still, too, if we have family members that were not kind to us and we don't have those kind of memories, the notion of how commanding and grabbing the power of memory is manifest in this poem, in which he said, she knew everything, basically. She knew what to say to me at every time, and I'm sure many of us, whether we lucky enough to have parents alive and in the room, but I can hear grandparents like that who had things to say, and you can hear them, and you can imagine when you're doing certain things, channeling the specific thing that they would say, not that, or this, or you should. We have so many stories that the role of the prophet is to essentially win us over to choose the right path. That's the role of the prophet. And he says that he has his own prophet, his private prophet with his mother, who is supposed to, the prophet, guide us on our way. But one of the things we know also about the prophets is that they weren't successful. They screamed and yelled, and we ignored. The people of Israel ignored, and we do that a lot to our loved ones too. But what happens when you can't ignore them anymore because they're no longer here, yet their prophecy is still looming large and strong. And so I think one of the questions of memory here, and he speaks to that, is that when she died, all her little predictions came together in one big prophecy that will last until the vision of the end of days. That it's like wove all together the story of how he experienced her, trying to sway him for his entire life. And yet now he's the one running out of time. He's never going to fulfill all of her wants and all of her pleas with him. And so what do we do with that sense of the past, one in some way telling us who we should be, right? That's also the role of the prophet. We just heard the words of Yeshayahu telling us what is the fast that we really should want. And we also have on our shoulder, I think, many memories of people who are telling us who we should or shouldn't be. How do we wrestle with that? And also, how do we wrestle with the missing of hearing those words? And yet, in a sense, recognizing that, according to Amichai, that even though his mother is no longer here in body, her prophecy is well beyond her physicality. Her impact and her legacy speaks on and prods on and screams on, not only in its bigness, but it's in its small details. And so this is one element, I think, of Yizkor that we don't only hold, often in the silence of Yizkor, I kind of go through the faces and the names of those people that are no longer here that I've personally lost, some of whom are also a part of our community that we've all lost, and kind of the power of their influence and the ways, the smallness of their picking at us or prodding at us then looms in this very long way to feel that we're embedded with an eternal prophecy that they've offered the world. The next poem is about his father. And it mirrors the mother one, because the mother one starts, Imi hayta nevi'ah velo yada. My mother was a prophet and didn't know. Avi haya Elohim velo yada. My father was God and didn't know. He gave me the 10 commandments, not in thunder and not in anger, not in fire and not in a cloud, but gently and with love. He added caresses and tender words, would you, and please, and chanted, remember and keep, with the same tune, and pleaded and wept quietly between one commandment and the next. Thou shalt not take the name of thy Lord in vain, shalt not take, not in vain. Please don't bear false witness against your neighbor. And he hugged me tight and whispered in my ear, thou shalt not steal, shalt not commit adultery, shalt not kill. And he lay the palms of his wide open hands on my head with the Yom Kippur blessing. Honor, love, that thy days may be long upon this earth. And the voice of my father, white as his hair, then he turned his face to me one last time, as on the day he died in my arms, and said, I know the end, so I'm already there. I would like to add 2 more commandments. The 11th commandment, lo tishtane, thou shalt not change. And the 12th commandment, hishtane tishtane, thou shalt change, you will change. Thus spoke my father, and he turned and walked away and disappeared into his strange distances. In this notion that his father was God, obviously, is the notion of how commanding. I mean, that's what he's speaking about in this poem, is that the giver of the 10 Commandments is God, the giver of the Torah, and how commanding, even though the way he describes his father personally is not a commanding presence, right? He was gentle and kind, and he hugged. He was affectionate, and he has many poems about his father. But that sense that how commanding he was the commander of what was right and good. And some of us have relatives who are like that, grandparents, parents, siblings, and some of us also mourn that we didn't have those kinds of parents or grandparents, and maybe we have other people in our lives who served in those ways for us. And I think one of the things that this poem does is raise up how commanding memory is. How even when someone is no longer here, they have such a powerful play on who we are and how we live. And the end, when it speaks to the 2 added commandments, thou shalt not change and thou shalt change, is obviously a contradiction, which is often memory is a contradiction too. On the one hand, a part of us dies when people die. You know, that part, that connected part to them that we no longer have, that touch. He speaks about his father's hands. My grandfather had very big hands. My mom's his yahrzeit was just on Monday, his 35th yahrzeit, and I can still feel those big hands, and he had very big feet. And I used to stand on his feet as a kid and be danced around, like those feelings and those memories, but I can't touch it anymore. And yet it feels so commanding about the experience of who he was. And then the other aspect of memory is we both, it's hard to imagine people that aren't here anymore, that they, on the one hand, they only knew us ad Khan up until one point. He only knew me until I was 16. It's like crazy to think, you know, however many years later, that he didn't know all those years. And we all have people like that we both want to live in the story of the past when we were a certain person, but also we have to grow, we have to change, and we can't live in the story of what was with who we were with. And so these companion pieces, I think, about memory are granting us, I think, some ways to think about not only how memory is a prophecy or memory is a command, but also how we wrestle with how we were with those who are no longer with us, and how also we move through who we can be, carrying them with us, but not having them demand of something that we can't give. That's also, I think, part on Yom Kippur as we're searching for who we need to be, trying to make amends. Also, we recognize there are people we have to do tshuva with that are no longer here anymore. We can't make amends with specific people. They are no longer here. Actually, there was a beautiful piece by Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg about asking amends from her mother, who's no longer here. She died of cancer a number of years ago, and she was in college, and she left her mom on New Year's Eve as she was in the hospital and really nearing the end of her life, because her mom said, go to that party. And Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg speaks about the fact that she never forgave herself for leaving her mom when she was in those last days, and she didn't have any way to make amends. And actually there's a halakha in Hilchot Tshuva in the Rambam's laws of Tshuva that says actually you can gather 10 witnesses at the grave to ask for amends. And so it was during COVID that she did this, so it was on Zoom. But I think just the image of how do we work through memory to let go of things that we can't change, that we can't return to a time with someone that is no longer here and say, I'm sorry, or also to say, you've hurt me. I want to let go of this pain. And so as we move into Yizkor and try to piece together all those visions of our past and those whom we loved or those who we wished could have been more loving, we try to hold the notion that we were certain people with certain people, and now also we have to move on to become the people we need to be. How will we carry them with us? How will we let their prophecy live, but also how will we be able to change? And so I ask us to sit in silence before Yizkor, to just sit with those who we're missing today, or maybe we're mourning but not missing, which is true also. And hold on to those memories and think about those people who have had such a command on our life, or we hear their prophecy every day, every hour of our lives, and what we will do with those memories. It is also a tradition for some people to leave at this time, so if it's your tradition to leave during Yizkor, some people who have parents alive, we're taught that you should not be in the sanctuary during Yizkor. I grew up with that. I think there's a truth to it, and there's also a Bubba Meister, a superstition about it. My Bubby was very superstitious, and so we were not allowed. But if it's not your tradition, you're welcome to stay. There's nothing wrong with staying, even if you have the zechut of blessing of having parents alive. So we'll just take a moment as people leave to sing, and then we'll sit in silence.